Cinema has adapted almost everything: Homer, Dostoevsky, Woolf. But there is a category it keeps circling without ever landing: books where the page isn't a container for the story, where the way a sentence moves, the way time breaks, the way meaning refuses to settle is the experience itself. Take that away, and you haven't made an adaptation. You've made a replacement for something that was never there. These are the 7 books that live entirely in that gap. Let's begin. In Search of Lost Time, Marcel Proust. 7 volumes, 4,000 pages. A narrator so attuned to the texture of a single moment that a childhood afternoon can expand into an entire world without apology. Proust's In Search of Lost Time has defeated more readers than almost any book in existence because it refuses to move the way narrative is supposed to move. Time here accumulates, collapses, resurfaces without warning. Bergson argued that consciousness is never truly in the present. The past doesn't disappear. It persists, layered inside every moment of experience, shaping perception without announcing itself. What we call now is already saturated with everything that came before it. Involuntary memory, for Proust, is simply the moment when that saturation becomes impossible to ignore. The Madeleine doesn't retrieve a childhood. It reveals one that never left. A film cuts. It selects a frame, holds it, moves to the next. That act of cutting is what Bergson called the cinematographic illusion: reality broken into static frames, movement reconstituted artificially. The camera can show you a face softening with recognition. It can play music that feels like longing, but it cannot place you inside a consciousness where the past is not behind you, where it never was. Proust's sentences move the way Bergson's time moves, without cuts, without frames, without the false clarity of one moment ending and another beginning. The Man Without Qualities, Robert Musil. Robert Musil spent the last 2 decades of his life writing The Man Without Qualities. He was still revising it when he died in 1942. The novel was never finished, and this is not a biographical accident. It is the book's deepest argument, a story about the impossibility of conclusion cannot, by its own logic, conclude. The novel is set in Vienna in 1913, on the eve of a civilization's collapse. At its center is Ulrich, a mathematician who has decided to take a year's leave from his life. Musil called this Möglichkeitssinn, the sense of possibility, the capacity to see not only what is, but what could be, what might be, what almost was. Ulrich is a character defined entirely by the space between his potentials. Cinema is the art of the actual. It captures what is happening, to whom, now. A face on screen is a positive presence. The moment a camera frames Ulrich, he acquires exactly what Musil spent 2,000 pages stripping away: a fixed identity. The lens cannot film a potentiality. It can only materialize one, and in doing so collapse everything Musil spent 2,000 pages holding open. What remains on the page, the digressions, the essays, the philosophical detours, is not ornamentation. It is the novel's true substance. Musil did not write a story that contains ideas. He wrote ideas that, with a cold, ironic precision, take the shape of a story. Infinite Jest, David Foster Wallace. David Foster Wallace's 1996 novel runs to 1,079 pages, carries 388 endnotes, and is set in a near-future North America where calendar years are no longer numbered, but sold to corporate sponsors. At its center is a film so pleasurable that everyone who watches it loses all desire for anything else. They watch it again and again until they die. Baudrillard described 4 stages of the image. First, it reflects reality. Then it masks reality. Then it masks the absence of reality. Finally, it bears no relation to reality at all. It becomes its own pure simulacrum, referring to nothing outside itself. Baudrillard called this hyperreality, a condition where the copy doesn't just replace the original, but makes the question of the original irrelevant. The film Inside Infinite Jest is that 4th stage made literal, a pure signal with no referent, pleasure so complete it becomes indistinguishable from annihilation. The novel's structure is its only defense against this. The endnotes interrupt. The chronology refuses to resolve. The sentences demand effort where the culture promises effortlessness. Wallace built a text that resists passive consumption at the level of form. Remove that resistance, and you remove the argument. A film adaptation would ask an audience to sit in the dark and be entertained, to surrender attention willingly, which is the one thing the book refuses to let you do. The adaptation would not fail to capture infinite jest. It would simply become what infinite jest was written against. House of Leaves, Mark Z. Danielewski. Published in 2000, House of Leaves tells the story of a house whose interior is larger than its exterior. A geometrically impossible space that expands without warning, generating corridors and rooms that should not exist. Around this impossibility, Danielewski constructs a novel that is itself architecturally unstable. Multiple narrators, footnotes within footnotes, text printed in different colors, sentences that run in different directions across the page, paragraphs that narrow to a single word. The book is not describing a labyrinth. It is one. Marcel McLuhan argued in Understanding Media, 1964, that the medium is the message, that the form through which content is delivered shapes experience more fundamentally than the content itself. House of Leaves is that argument taken to its structural limit. The impossible house and the impossible book are the same object. Reading it requires physical participation, rotating the page, holding it to the light, tracking footnotes across dozens of pages. The disorientation is not a theme the novel explores. It is what the novel does to the reader's body. A film adaptation could represent the impossible house, show its corridors, its darkness, its geometric horror. But the screen never asks to be rotated. It never requires the viewer to track a footnote across 40 pages, losing their place in two narratives simultaneously. The house in the novel is frightening because the reader is already inside it, not watching someone else navigate it from the safety of a seat in the dark. Gravity's Rainbow, Thomas Pynchon. Thomas Pynchon's 1973 novel follows Tyrone Slothrop, an American lieutenant whose sexual encounters in London map precisely onto the locations where V-2 rockets will subsequently strike. From this impossible premise, the novel expands into over 400 characters, dozens of interlocking plots, and a paranoid vision of Western civilization in which everything may be connected and nothing can be verified. The novel's architecture is entropic in the precise sense that Claude Shannon defined. As a system accumulates more information, the signal becomes harder to distinguish from the noise. Gravity's Rainbow generates meaning faster than it can be organized. Conspiracies multiply, patterns emerge and dissolve, characters appear for 50 pages and vanish. The reader cannot hold it together. That is the point. A director attempting to adapt Gravity's Rainbow faces a choice with no exit. Impose narrative order, and the film becomes a coherent thriller about a man who suspects too much. Refuse narrative order, and the film loses its audience in the first 20 minutes. Coherence is what cinema requires to function. Gravity's Rainbow is a machine designed to make coherence impossible. The parabola of the V-2 rocket, ascending, then falling, is the novel's central image, a perfect arc that ends in annihilation. Pynchon spent 700 pages refusing to let that arc resolve into meaning. A film cannot spend 2 hours doing the same thing and remain a film. Finnegan's Wake, James Joyce. James Joyce spent 17 years writing Finnegan's Wake. When it was published in 1939, most readers, including some of his closest friends, could not understand it. This was not a failure. It was the point. Joyce built it from fragments of over 60 languages, portmanteau words that carry multiple meanings simultaneously, puns that operate in 4 directions at once, sentences that begin in one tongue and end in another. The opening line runs directly into the closing line of the book, making it a text with no beginning and no end. Every reading produces a different novel. No two readers have ever read the same Finnegan's Wake. Derrida argued that meaning is never fully present in a sign. It is always deferred, always sliding towards something else. He called this difference, the endless movement of meaning that can never be fixed or finalized. Finnegan's Wake is the only novel ever written that makes this argument at the level of every single word. The text does not contain meaning. It performs the impossibility of containing it. A camera shows something. The moment it does, that thing is present, visible, located, fixed in a frame. Cinema produces presence. Finnegan's Wake is constructed entirely from the refusal of presence. To adapt it would not be to translate it into a new medium. It would be to destroy the only thing it is. The Sound and the Fury, William Faulkner. Faulkner's 1929 novel moves through four minds, four versions of the same family's collapse, but the first section is categorically different from everything that follows. The narrator, Benji, is 33 years old, intellectually disabled, and without any concept of time. A scene from 1928 shifts without warning into 1910. For Benji, this is not a flashback. The past never ended. Husserl argued that consciousness never lives in a pure now. Every moment carries the retention of what just passed and the protention of what is about to come. And it is this triple structure, past bleeding into present bleeding into future, that makes experience feel coherent. In Benji's mind, that structure is broken. Retention and protention have no bridge between them. Each moment arrives alone. A film always constructs a now. Whatever appears on screen exists in a present tense, even when it reaches into the past. A flashback is still a now, just a now located elsewhere. Benji has no now. Moments come, dissolve, and are replaced by other moments with no continuity between them. Faulkner encodes this collapse into the act of reading itself. In the italics, the fractured syntax, the absence of temporal markers. The disorientation is not described. It is performed on the page, in real time, and the reader, unlike the viewer, has no choice but to live inside it. These 7 books don't resist cinema. They simply don't need it. They do something cinema was never built to do, and they do it in the only place it has ever been possible. The page. Thank you for watching.